was the most challenging that you worked on, and why? Jen.
Well, that's an easy one for me. The most challenging and the most rewarding one was Vampire of the Dark Ages.
Yeah.
You know, that was something where I came into something that Andrew had gotten started, and kind of put my own spin on it. I had been a medieval and Renaissance studies major in college, so coming at it and saying, okay, I want to do more of the history part of this, but that was the first time that I think we really sat down and reinterpreted the idea of the clans, the idea of humanity and the paths and everything like that from scratch, where we broke it down and we said, okay, we have to keep continuity because, there are vampires that were from this period that are still around, in the modern period. So we had to make sure that we kept that line of continuity while creating something that was a very different feel to it, a very different perspective, something that would be true to the time period we were trying to emulate, but also something that could easily pass from there to the present without too many bumps.
And I'd like to say that while I started that book, I think Jen's fresh perspective made it a lot better than I would have made it.
I also have an easy one, Kindred of the East. I had always been fascinated from the very beginning of my tenure at White Wolf with one little paragraph in the very back of the first edition, and it was essentially talking about how the vampires of the Far East, India, whatnot, were very unknown, and they were considered to be completely different from Western kindred. So I kind of wanted to, I had always wanted to explore that, and when I got the reins, I immediately jumped on that because I really wanted to do that more than anything else. And also because, this is to make a gross generalization, but Vampire follows the sort of very teleological, very linear Western style mythology with an end time and a Gehenna, and things are going to happen here. And I felt like it was, there's a whole part of the world that has more of a very cyclical notion of how things work. Again, that's just, I don't want to stereotype, but you have the Dharmic religions against the Abrahamic religions, and you have, an idea of cycles and whatnot, and more balance as opposed to good and bad. And so even mechanically in that book, I tried and didn't necessarily 100% succeed, but I wanted to have opposing pairs of traits in which having too much of something is just as bad as having too little, because most other games, it's like, an 18 intelligence is always better than a 16 intelligence. A +5 sword is better than a +4 sword, and sometimes having too much of something is just as bad as, not having enough. So I tried, as best I could to explore those themes of the book, and it was a very challenging endeavor.
Well,
as tempted as I am actually to say Lancea Sanctum, if only because it was the first book that I came in on, and it was started already with Justin's Catholicism when I came in. Probably the hardest one is Damnation City, which was the most akin to doing a complete new game of its own. Just the gigantic book that it was. And that book, to be fair, changed considerably from its original design to its final incarnation, being originally just kind of a fictional city book to being what it was, which is sort of the meta-fictional city book. But from day one, it was exciting. It was a game I really wanted to do, to try to reiterate what Requiem could be in play, how it was about people wanting each other's stuff, how it was about putting players into conflict with each other without completely unraveling playgroups. Essentially how politics works on the street. But that book was a bitch from beginning to end, just in sheer scope. And again, and you wrote a huge chunk of that book too. And just, so the godsend, I should say, was a lot of authors came in with notions of what has been missing from city books from any other game, or what are the problems that you have when you're writing about a city, essentially writing about a city for your own home games. And so we ended up with this great mix that was bigger than I think could have been predicted. And it's just, a lot of that goes out to the writers in terms of bringing in ideas like having a chase mechanic and 100 people you meet on the street and being that utilitarian. But it's extremely difficult to see the end of that book from the beginning of it because it was so piecemeal. So it was a big challenge, but I'm very happy with the way it turned out.
I've got two. One of the most difficult to work on was the Ebony Kingdom book, which I don't know if you guys are familiar with, but is a book about a setting book for the Kindred of Africa. And I look around, role-playing is a white dude's hobby. So part of the challenge was making the game appealing to the people who were buying books already, while still remaining true enough to the source material that you were depicting in actual Africa, as opposed to kind of this stereotypical or idealized, something that did have its roots. It's a very, all of the mythology in the book is well researched. I mean, it's a book that spent a lot of time in coming together. And the other book that was very difficult was Requiem itself. Usually, in working on a book, we would go through 2 drafts and revisions. So your writer sends in a draft, and you redline it, and you send it back to him. And he goes and does your corrections, and his second draft comes back in, and then you correct it, or not correct it, but you develop it, and you put it together for publication. So you kind of see 2 drafts of a writer's work. But Requiem went through 16 different iterations where we were constantly tweaking, like, let's work with this, let's work with this, let's mess with this, let's change this idea. One of the things I've always wanted to do is put out the original outline for Requiem, which was largely indistinguishable from Masquerade. I mean, if you would look at it now, you would say that's the same goddamn game. I'm glad you didn't charge me $35 for that. But then I also think that Requiem is still, of all of the new World of Darkness games, the closest to its parent material. So you kind of see the growing pains of the process, where we were really given entirely free creative license to go in a new direction. And I wanted to take, I mean, I can't say enough about the work of the developers